pull into any truck stop in America tonight at 2 a.m. and you'll see the same scene. A tired man or woman eating alone at a Waffle House counter. A row of rigs outside, most of them with over 600,000 miles on the odometer. Paint faded, engines rumbling, drivers who haven't seen their families in 3 weeks. You've probably looked at that scene and thought, yeah, that's just what trucking is. A grind. A hard life that people choose because they didn't have better options. But here's the thing, almost nobody knows. In 1980, the average American trucker earned the equivalent of about $131,000 a year in today's dollars. They owned homes. They took vacations. They put kids through college on one paycheck. It was one of the best blue-collar jobs in the country. And then, in less than a decade, that entire world collapsed. Ask any long-haul driver over 55 why, and most of them will name the same man. An Arkansas sharecropper's son who dropped out of school in the 7th grade and built the largest publicly traded trucking company in America. The popular answer is deregulation. But deregulation didn't ruin trucking. Somebody figured out how to weaponize it. The answer has 3 layers. Most people only ever hear the first one, and the whole thing connects to something you carried into your kitchen this morning. But to understand how one man broke an entire profession, you have to start with what made it great in the first place. Go back to the late 1970s. A truck driver in Chicago or Detroit or Pittsburgh was not a hard luck figure. He was a middle-class union man with a seniority number, a pension, and a house in a decent neighborhood. Under the 1935 Motor Carrier Act, the federal government had locked the entire trucking industry inside a rate-regulated system. The Interstate Commerce Commission decided who could carry what, on which route, and at what price. A single trucking route, for example hauling dry goods from Chicago to Kansas City, could sell on the private market for over $1 million. That is how valuable a protected freight lane was. And inside that system, the Teamsters were one of the most powerful unions in America. The National Master Freight Agreement covered roughly 500,000 drivers across nearly 1,000 carriers. Wages for ICC regulated. Unionized truckers ran about 50% higher than comparable blue-collar jobs in other industries. So why did the government break it? Because by the late 1970s, inflation was eating America alive. Gasoline, groceries, everything cost more every month. Economists pointed at protected industries and said if competition were allowed, prices would fall. President Jimmy Carter agreed. On July 1st, 1980, he signed the Motor Carrier Act of 1980. On paper, it was a modest reform. In practice, it was a starter gun. The act made it dramatically easier for new carriers to enter the industry, let truckers price freely within a 15% zone, and ended route protection almost overnight. Within a decade, the number of licensed carriers more than doubled, exceeding 40,000 by 1990. Most of them were small, non-union startups paying a fraction of what established firms paid. The old giants, Consolidated Freightways, Yellow Freight, Roadway, thought they would survive by adjusting. They had pension obligations, union contracts, legacy cost structures. They could not cut fast enough. Truckload shipment rates fell 25% between 1977 and 1982, adjusted for inflation. That is a brutal number. That is an industry where every carrier was suddenly competing for the same freight at cheaper prices with no wage protection underneath. But here is what almost nobody saw coming. The companies that thought they were competing in a deregulated market were not really the threat. Out in Lowell, Arkansas, a lumber salesman turned truck driver had been preparing for this moment for years. And he was not going to play the old game better. He was going to rewrite the rules of the game entirely, in a way the legacy carriers could not copy, even if they wanted to. To understand why his version of trucking spread everywhere, you have to understand the trick he pulled, one that nobody else was willing to pull. Johnny Bryan Hunt bought his first trucking operation in 1969. 5 tractors, 7 trailers. It was a sideline to a rice hull business he and his wife Johnelle had started in Arkansas 8 years earlier. For most of the 1970s, his trucking outfit was unremarkable. By 1983, it was the 80th largest trucking firm in the country, solidly mid-tier. Then something happened that looks almost impossible on paper. Between 1980 and 1990, J.B. Hunt Transport Services grew by 2,000%. By 1987, it was the largest publicly traded trucking company in the United States. So what did Hunt do that nobody else had the appetite to do? According to industry records archived at encyclopedia.com, his strategy is documented in one brutal sentence. He moved to replace privately owned and operated rigs with his own non-union drivers and equipment. That one sentence is what broke trucking, because Hunt did three things simultaneously that the legacy firms could not. First, non-union labor. He recruited heavily from rural Arkansas, from small southern towns, from places where Teamster organizing was weak or non-existent. No union dues, no master freight agreement, no seniority pay scale, no pension contributions. Drivers who would run hard for a fraction of what a Chicago Teamster earned. Second, an owned fleet. Most competitors leased their rigs from independent owner-operators at fixed rates. Hunt bought his own trucks, so he controlled costs top to bottom: fuel, maintenance, scheduling, depreciation. Third, fuel discipline. Fuel was roughly 16% of revenue, and Hunt paid monthly incentives to drivers who kept the needle at 55 miles per hour. Small habits, massive aggregate savings. But here's what made this devastating to competitors. The legacy union carriers were locked into contracts they could not escape. Teamster wages, pension obligations, work rules. While Hunt ran lean out of Arkansas, they bled. By 1982, 183 unionized carriers had gone out of business. 30% of freight Teamsters were unemployed. Teamster President Jackie Presser, watching his members starve, proposed a 1983 relief rider that would cut wages by up to 35% just to keep carriers alive. The rank and file voted it down, 94,086 to 13,082. They were not rejecting reality. They were delaying it by 5 years, because the savings Hunt unlocked did not stay in the trucking industry. They became the price tag on nearly everything in your fridge. But we will get to that. Here is the part that hurt drivers even more than the non-union model. Sociologist Steve Viselli, in research published in The Atlantic, documented how the Hunt model accelerated another shift, misclassifying drivers as independent contractors. On paper, they were small business owners. In practice, they were employees who had to pay for the truck, the fuel, the insurance, and the maintenance themselves. By 1998, drivers were earning 30 to 40% less than their predecessors before 1980. And in Atlanta alone, average hourly trucker earnings dropped 31% between 1980 and 2017. The Berkeley Labor Center later found that over 1/4 of independent contractor truckers are misclassified, including drivers for FedEx and Amazon. Some lease purchase contracts lock drivers in so tightly that walking away can cost up to $65,000. One economic expert told Business Insider the clearest line anyone has ever written about this model. The prices of trucking got cheaper, but the ability to make a living evaporated. But Hunt's most consequential move was not about drivers at all. It was about something sitting right next to the highway that every other trucking company had treated as a mortal enemy for a century. But here's where it gets genuinely strange. For 100 years, trucking and railroads had hated each other. When the interstate system went in during the late 1950s and the 1960s, trucks took freight away from trains at a speed the railroads never recovered from. By the late 1980s, the two industries looked at each other across the highway like two boxers who'd agreed never to touch, until a man named Mike Haverty, president of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, did something nobody in either industry thought possible. Haverty had written a business school thesis arguing that trains and trucks should combine forces. Trains for the long-haul miles, trucks for the first and last leg. Everyone he pitched it to told him the same thing. Railroad companies and trucking companies hate each other. It won't work. In 1988, Haverty visited Hunt in Lowell, Arkansas. The next year, he invited Hunt onto a Santa Fe business car for a train ride from Chicago toward Kansas City. Somewhere around Galesburg, Illinois, according to Haverty's own account, Hunt walked over and said, "Haverty, we've got a deal." On February 5th, 1989, the first J.B. Hunt trailer was loaded onto a Santa Fe railcar. The service started absurdly small, 150 trailers and 5 railcars moving freight between Chicago and California. And that handshake is why half the stuff in your house got cheaper, because the economics rewrote the entire freight map. A trailer on a railcar uses a fraction of the fuel of a pure, long-haul truck. Crucially, it also needs fewer drivers to move the same freight the same distance. Every container on a train is a long-haul driving job that simply doesn't exist anymore. By 2008, the J.B. Hunt and BNSF partnership was moving more than 700,000 shipments a year. By 2024, J.B. Hunt owned roughly 132,000 intermodal containers, the largest intermodal fleet in North America, with a target of 150,000 by 2027. But here's the part nobody told the public. When long-haul trucking jobs turned into short drayage jobs, quick runs from a rail yard to a warehouse, the pay structure collapsed to match. A drayage driver in Long Beach or Chicago doesn't earn what a cross-country teamster earned in 1980. Not even close. And that's before you even get to the Walmart piece. In April 2000, J.B. Hunt signed a contract with Walmart worth over $100 million a year to handle 31 of Walmart's distribution centers. Walmart had been using roughly 50 separate carriers. Hunt replaced all of them. That consolidation play became the new normal. Give the largest shipper the largest carrier, and watch everyone in between get squeezed out. 24 years later, in February 2024, Walmart handed over its entire intermodal fleet, roughly 15,500 containers, to J.B. Hunt in a long-term deal, because Walmart's internal operation cost more than Hunt's network did. Once the largest retailer in America runs on the Hunt model, every other retailer has to match Walmart's shipping costs to compete. Therefore, every other retailer's carriers have to match Hunt's costs, which means cutting wages even further. And that's exactly why the ripple effect you are about to feel in your own budget goes deeper than you would ever guess. Now pull back and look at your daily life. Almost every box you didn't notice arrive is riding on top of the Hunt model, your Amazon Prime order. Amazon Freight and its subcontractors run the template: independent contractors, non-union, paid per mile, lease-to-own trucks. The FedEx ground driver who dropped a package at your door this week is an independent contractor. An Amazon DSP driver is an independent contractor. The template for how those jobs are structured is Hunt's template, ported across the logistics industry. Walmart's everyday low price, the whole reason Walmart beat Sears, Kmart, and every regional chain on the map, rests directly on the contract architecture and intermodal shipping costs Hunt pioneered. Every overnight grocery restock at your local store rides from a port or factory on a train, offloads at an intermodal yard, and comes to your store on a short-haul driver making a fraction of what his predecessor made in 1980. You've been living inside Hunt's model your whole adult life without knowing what to call it. The fact that you can get a couch shipped from California to Maine for less than the cost of a dinner out, that's the Hunt model. The fact that a t-shirt that crossed 2 oceans costs less than a sandwich, the Hunt model enabled it. But here's the part that should stop you cold. The American Trucking Association keeps warning about a driver shortage. Currently around 80,000 drivers, projected to hit 160,000 by 2030. It is not a shortage of people with commercial licenses. It is a shortage of people willing to drive for the wages Hunt's model made the industry-wide baseline. Annual turnover at the big truckload carriers runs above 90% most years. Drivers rotate through the system like a conveyor. In 1980, a unionized trucker made the equivalent of about $131,000 a year, owned a home, and took vacations. In 2025, the typical long-haul driver earns around $50,000 to $55,000, works more than 60 hours a week, and sleeps in the cab behind his seat. One profession collapsed. The savings became your grocery bill. So what are you actually looking at when you see that tired guy at the Waffle House? Here is where you actually land. You pulled into that truck stop thinking you were looking at a tired trucker, a hard life, a bad career choice. But what you were actually looking at was a 45-year-old deregulation law signed on July 1st, 1980. An Arkansas sharecropper's son who saw an opening nobody else saw. A handshake on a Santa Fe rail car near Galesburg, Illinois in 1989. A Walmart contract that rewrote how every American retailer ships freight. And a pay cut that started in 1980 and never stopped. That man alone at the Waffle House at 2 a.m. is not a bad life choice. He is living inside the business model that built your grocery bill. J.B. Hunt did not ruin trucking in the sense of destroying it. He built something so structurally efficient that the old version of trucking, unionized, rate-protected, middle class, could not exist alongside it. The industry did not die. It mutated. And every cheap thing you own rides on top of that mutation. You are not just looking at a broken profession. You are looking at the invisible machine that made American consumerism cheap, and the people who paid for it so you did not have to. And if you think the story of how one man quietly reshaped trucking is strange, wait until we get into what happened the day one executive at a single American steelmaker did the exact same thing to an entire city, and why half the Midwest still has not recovered.